So the 24-50, now I know what you're thinking, you're like, what? This isn't a lens that we actually asked for, what are you doing, Sony? But I mean, the FX3 wasn't a camera we asked for, and how good did that turn out? We got a lot to get through in this video. We have to talk about the build quality, what they actually had to take out of this to make it so much cheaper and really, really affordable. So yeah, let's get it. What's going on, my friends? I hope you're all doing absolutely fantastic. If you are new to my channel, please consider subscribing. Today, I've got my hands on the 24-50. Now, I've had this for the last couple of weeks, and I have shot a couple of videos on this as well, and it is a very interesting lens, especially the price. $10.99 US. I mean, wow, that is crazy cheap, especially when you start thinking about how much a 24-70 GM Mark II is. It's about half the price, which will give you the ability to get this lens and obviously get another lens. But let's have a look at some of the specs and what it actually gives you, and then we can actually go into some of the image quality tests. So the Sony 24-50 f2.8 G lens has a maximum aperture of f2.8 and a minimum aperture of f22. It has 16 elements in 13 groups, has an 11 blade aperture diaphragm, has a linear focus motor for fast autofocus, a front filter thread of 67mm, and weighs a total of 440 grams. Now, for obvious reasons, when it comes to the design, it looks pretty much just like all the other newer G or GM lenses when it comes to the aperture ring, the focus ring on the front, you've got the zoom ring in the middle, you do have the autofocus to manual focus switch, you've got the custom button, the iris click or non-clicked, but it doesn't have an iris lock, which is pretty interesting. I thought they would put an iris lock on there, but they don't. They probably reserve that for the GM lenses, but overall, it pretty much looks like the brand new G lenses or even G Master lenses, obviously without that GM badge. And they did actually keep the front diameter consistent because it's a 67mm front filter thread. So, you know, us video shooters, when it comes to using variable ND filters, we don't have to keep using different step up rings and step down rings. So that is great. And I love the consistency through the range. Now, just before we get into it as well, when it comes to image quality, it is subjective. It really depends on what you actually prefer, especially when it comes to video. When it comes to the photography side, a lot of people like really sharp clinical lenses. So really depends on what you actually do, but Sony are trying to cater towards photographers and videographers. But just note that this is a G lens, it's not a G Master lens, so it's not going to be as sharp as a G Master, but it still should be fairly decently sharp. So let's check it out. So this is 24mm at f2.8, and you can see right from the start there is significant barrel distortion, but you can correct this with the lens correction in your Lightroom. But if we do go into the center, it is actually quite sharp, wide open in the center, and out to the corners a little bit soft, but still fairly decently sharp. It's pretty impressive. If you do stop it down to 3.2, f4, f5.6, obviously they do sharpen up, and yeah, it's great performance already at 24mm. And if we go to 50mm, there isn't really that much distortion. If you go into the center, it's actually really sharp in the center, and out to the corners, it's a little bit soft as well. But if you do stop it down to f3.2, f4, or f5.6, it obviously does sharpen up quite a lot. And overall, really good performance considering it's only just a G lens. This one, it performs extremely well. I'm so surprised by how good this actually performs, and they actually did say that the performance isn't as great as the G Master. Like, yeah, sure, it isn't as great, but it's still really, really good, and you probably won't notice any difference whatsoever. Now, when it comes to sharpness in the real world and autofocus speed, it performed incredible with the Sony FX6. Now, the FX6's autofocus probably isn't as fast as the newer Sony cameras, so it would perform even better. But even in this really low-key situation that I've been putting it in, it's incredibly sharp wide open at f2.8, and I wasn't worried one bit with this whole shoot filming with this lens. And Sony themselves even said that this would keep up with the brand new A9 III with 120 frames per second in stills. So the autofocus should be no issues, even though it doesn't have the XD linear focusing motor. It will still perform incredibly well under these type of situations, or maybe even any other situation. And I do have to note as well that this is a really low-key scene, so it was meant to be dark and moody. This is what the brand wanted, and the autofocus kept up incredibly well, which I'm super happy for. Also, I gotta mention with this gym shoot, if you are seeing the highlights blooming, that is because I do have a 1/4 mist in front of this lens. So that will change the look of what this lens can actually do, but it's not going to affect the sharpness of the lens. It'll just give it a little bit more character to the scene. And I did use it in a very high key situation with the Sony ZV-E1, and obviously it performed incredibly well. The Sony ZV-E1 has the newest focusing systems in there, so it's not going to have any issues with this brand new lens. And I just feel like it is a great pair with these smaller mirrorless cameras, that's for sure. So what kind of chromatic aberrations do we actually have with this lens? So if we do have a look at chromatic aberrations, specifically longitudinal chromatic aberrations, it doesn't really seem like there is too much. If you do stop it down, it does get a little bit better, but it's nothing to worry about anyway, both at 24 mils and both at 50 mil. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people out there saying, oh, well, the barrel extends. Oh, I hate the barrel. Why does it have to extend? Blah, blah, blah. Look, the GM Mark II does the same. And the biggest thing about having the barrel extension is that when you're actually using it, sure, it's larger, but when you're putting it back in your backpack, it is so much smaller. Compactness when it comes to putting these away is what I personally would prefer than actually having a physically longer lens and zooming internals. And when it comes to the external zoom design, I know there's going to be a few people that are going to be worried about dust and moisture getting into the lens, and this actually couldn't be further from the truth. There is some really good dust and moisture proof sealing gaskets inside the lens that actually prevent any kind of dust and moisture getting into the lens itself. Now for gimbal work. If you do fly this on the gimbal, at the wide end 24 millimeters is where the barrel extends right out. And obviously if you do put it to 50 mils, it comes right in. So if you do actually balance it with it fully extended at 24 mil, and then you bring it to 50 mil, it doesn't tilt back as fast as you would probably think. But obviously if you do put a filter on the front, that does make it heavier at the long end, and then when you actually do retract it, it does fall back a little bit faster. But in this case, you actually balance it with the barrel extended halfway out, and this will give you that happy medium in between the two. But without a filter, balances very, very good. But pretty much with all modern day gimbals, you won't have any issues when it comes to power and it overloading the gimbal. So if this is designed for video, what's the focus breathing going to be like? Let's check it out. Now when it comes to focus breathing at 24 millimeters, you can see it doesn't really breathe too much, but if you do have that focus breathing compensation inside your camera, it will crop in and obviously account for the focus breathing. If we go to 50 millimeters, there is a little bit more focus breathing than 24 mil, but same thing, if you do actually have focus breathing compensation, you won't actually have that issue. But you'll only really notice this if you are pulling from close to far really fast, but when it comes to normal video work, you will not notice a difference whatsoever. Now, minimum focus at 24 millimeters is 0.19 meters, which is pretty interesting. It's not crazy macro close, but it is fairly decently close at 24 millimeters. And at the long end, it is 0.3 meters at 50 mil, which is pretty decent for a 50 mil, but same, it's not a macro lens, and I probably wouldn't use it for macro lenses, but it can capture fairly decent details when it comes to that close focusing distance. Now, where did they have to cut the cost? That's what we have to talk about. And obviously that 24 to 50 range is where they can cut that cost, mainly for the fact that you are losing 20 mils on that telephoto end. So you're not actually going to be using the type of glass that needs a 24 to 70, a longer focal length in between. So that's where they're going to be cutting the costs there. And also internally, it doesn't have the XD linear focusing motor, which I'm assuming the XD linear focusing motor is quite expensive. So that's why they didn't put it in there. They pretty much got it in all of the other Sony lenses because it is extremely fast when it comes to focusing, and just the way it works, it's extremely light as well. But they said that this can keep up with the A9 III's 120 frames per second still capability. So when it comes to autofocus, it is absolutely no slouch, which is really, really good. Now, if we have a look at the bokeh shape, you can see at 24mm, it isn't exactly spherical, but it looks fairly decent. If we go to 50mm, you can see it isn't exactly spherical as well in the center, and when you do get out to the corners, it does have some cat eye characteristics as well, but really depends on what you actually prefer. And now we'll have a look at the flaring test, and it doesn't seem to flare too much. It doesn't really wash out the image incredibly. It does lose a little bit of contrast and ghost a touch. But it still looks fairly decent. There is a little bit more artifacts at the 50mm as opposed to the 24mm. Now, who is this designed for? Look, it's pretty much designed for people who want to do some videography, who want to do some gimbal work, because it is light, it is small, anyone who wants to do travel videos, and obviously for people who don't have the large amount of money to spend on a G Master lens, but want very similar quality, and obviously want a Sony branded lens. And the 24 to 50 is a fairly decent range. You've got your wide end at 24, you've got your sort of mid portrait sort of range at the 50mm, and like I said, if you pair this with a fast prime like an 85 f1.4 or f1.8, you're going to get pretty much a massive range out of this and get so much use because of the price of this, and you're able to afford other things. That I feel like that is far more important to try and invest in other gear rather than just putting all your money into just one lens. So look, overall, fantastic lens. I think it performs very well, especially when it comes to the price. The quality is great, and I do find the range is actually quite useful. And if you do want to go the G Master quality, obviously you've got the 24 to 70 G Master. If you want to go wider, you've got the 16 to 35 G Master. So there are so many different lens options when it comes to E-mounts, and obviously you can go third party if you really wanted to. E-mounts like the GOAT when it comes to having so many different options for that. But I'm so thankful that Sony is still bringing out a whole bunch of other lenses, and I'm so looking forward to 2024 this year, because I think there's going to be some pretty epic lenses dropping this year. So anyway, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, let's get it.